Lee Williams is better known as the gun writer, in capitals, the gun writer. Lee's been writing about guns for more than 8 years. Until recently, he also worked as the editor and investigative reporter. Have you read his work? His investigative reporter kind of cape shows up. It really, really does. But he's been an investigative reporter for the daily newspapers in Sarasota, Florida. Before becoming a journalist, Lee served in the Army and has earned 3 Medals of Valor during his time served as a police officer. Lee has earned more than a dozen national journalism awards with his reporting, and he wants to share some of his knowledge with all of us. So join me in welcoming Lee Williams.
Good morning. I am very glad to be here, extremely glad to be here. I got on the last flight out of Sarasota yesterday, where I live, and beat the storm. I'm also on the board of Florida Carry, and I don't think those guys were as lucky. So if you see guys from Florida here, they'll probably be rolling in probably Monday afternoon. Yeah, we're going to talk about investigative reporting. Um, it's been my bailiwick for 20 years. I spent 20 years as an investigative reporter and last 2 as an editor. In 2010, at my last paper, which was the Herald Tribune in Sarasota, Florida, I got called into the editor's office. The guy's name was Bill Church, great guy. He said, "We're asking some of our reporters here to start writing about their passion topics." So I said, "Well, Bill, my passion's guns. I mean, I don't ever remember not shooting as a kid. I grew up with guns." And he goes, "Well, start a gun blog." And I did for 10 years. It was the only pro-gun website sponsored by a daily newspaper. And it was fun. We had a lot of stuff traveled all over. Bill ate a lot of crap for doing that. But I found out later he's half Japanese and he considered himself a samurai. So he took it all and never let me know about all the crap he was getting. And then a couple years ago, my newspaper got bought by Gannett. And once they found out they had an editor then in Sarasota who was writing pro-gun stories about, on a regular basis, they got rid of me and they got rid of my boss. So a couple days later, when I was doing the gun writer, I was on Armed American Radio several times. Mark Walters is a good friend. After I got canned by Gannett, he calls and says, "Hey, just hold on. You're going to get a call from Alan Gottlieb of the Second Amendment Foundation. Take the damn call, Lee." So I did, and Alan said, "Hey, why don't you be our investigative reporter?" And we have been rocking and rolling and having more fun than I've ever had in my life. My stories are more fun. I don't have to look over my shoulder to make sure there's not going to be some corporate hack from Gannett coming to lift my hair. And they're getting read more. And I truly mean this, I've written for all types of audiences. I worked at newspapers in South Dakota, US Virgin Islands, Delaware, Florida. I've never had a smarter audience than gun guys and gals because you all get it. Okay. And when you look at what we're stacked up against, I mean, look what the army that those who want to take away and infringe upon our Second Amendment rights have. They've got CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, sometimes Fox, MSLSD. Okay. Who do we have? Well, us. We have the power of grassroots activism, and that's strong. When I was in the Army, and this is what it'll lead into the investigative reporting thing. My job in the Army, I was trained as an interrogator, and that really changed my life. It taught me how to do interviews. It taught me how to structure an interview, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Also taught me Russian, because everybody who's an interrogator has to learn a foreign language. Unless we invade Canada or England, we need to speak a foreign language. I spent 18 months in Monterey, California, Defense Language Institute, learning Russian. I still dream in Russian occasionally. But interrogation school, great. If you want to be a really good interviewer, highly recommend it. Go ahead and enlist. Let's talk about investigative reporting a little bit. Orwell, and I've never seen a better quote about the media. Journalism is printing what someone does not want to be printed. Everything else is PR. And that's 100% true. 100% true. We have a lot of PR reporters out there. A lot of guys writing about this, that, and the other thing. Everything's good. especially, in the newspapering, even though that's pretty much dying. You got guys that'll review stuff. Every new item is the best they've ever seen until they get one the next week. Um, you can look at the definition from Missouri School. My personal definition of investigative reporting, and keep in mind, what we're going to be going over today is my style of reporting, and I've always been about as subtle as a sucking chest wound, okay? But it works for me. For me, my personal definition of investigative reporting is picking somebody or some corporation up by the neck and telling the world, this is a bad man, or this is a bad woman, or this is a bad company. And that's what it's all about. Comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. Now, who can use the stuff we're going to talk about today? All of you. How many podcasters we got? Give me hands. Okay. Anybody writing some type of print for online? Okay, good. Any TV or radio? Okay. Digital? And have I left anybody out? How about social media influencers? Mark, you're the best. Can't wait for yours. Here's what we're going to be talking about today. And yeah, I'm going to try and encapsulate 20 years into a little over an hour. Interviewing, we're going to hit that hard. How to develop sources. That's one of the big questions I always got from young reporters. How do I get somebody to talk to me? We'll go into that. Document exploitation. By the way, if you all have questions, let's just keep this informal. Raise a hand if you got a question. If I miss you, throw something light at me. Documents more than just FOIAs. Libel, how you can not get sued. Okay. I got to talk about writing because we can all improve our writing, trust me. And we're going to talk about ethics, like Amanda mentioned, because if we don't police ourselves, who's gonna? It's going to be the other team. They're going to be calling BS on us. Photos, graphics, tips for getting published. And I would be remiss if I didn't leave this out. If you do this right, you're going to piss a lot of people off. I have. I take my personal security extremely seriously. Uh, Enough said about that. I am a proud member of the Staccato cult. Um, and there you see, we're all going to be drinking from the fire hose today. Interviewing. Interviewing is the art and science, and I stress art, of questioning and examining an individual in order to gain the maximum amount of truthful information in the minimum amount of time. Time is precious. You don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste your source's time. So questioning and examining, what does examining mean? Well, I'm looking at them. I try and do interviews at their house, not mine. I definitely try not to do an interview over the phone because I want to see where they live. I want to see where they work. I want to see what stuff's on the wall. I want to see the bric-a-brac they've got on their desk. When I examine them, I'm looking at their dress, how they carry themselves, how they comport themselves. One of the big reasons we'll get to later is because I have to decide whether or not they're being deceptive. Okay, whether or not I'm going to trust what they're saying. Types of journalism interviews. You got your standard news interview. You ask them questions, they give you answers. Expert interview, we'll get into that a little bit. That was always the fun part for me, not the funnest, but a fun part. Learning something about something I know nothing about. For example, when I was in South Dakota, I did something on Stachybotrys. I became a black mold remediation specialist because I did some series of stories on how the college there, South Dakota State University, how the dorms were just inundated with black mold. They ended up dosing them to cure it. They had mold appearing on the pipes, and the janitors were just spray painting it with white spray paint. So I went to a lot of experts. You have to be. That's a special kind of interview we'll talk about. Man in the street, we've all done it. I always try and get a diverse group of opinions, not a diverse group of people, a diverse group of opinions whenever I put a story in there where we talk to 5 or 10 people. And the most important is the showdown interview. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be drinking from the fire hose on that. The showdown interview, when I do a story on ATF's latest atrocity, before I begin, before I get them on the phone, I create a sheet, a document, and I start writing questions. And it doesn't matter if it's ATF or whoever you're going to expose, whoever you're going to pick up by the neck and say, this is a bad man, start a list of questions right away. The showdown interview is what you do right before you publish or broadcast or whatever. It is the pinnacle, the most difficult type of interview. My record is 128 written questions for the Secretary of the Delaware Department of Corrections, cost him his job as a result. But it was really fun to do. They're also really fun. Oh, I forgot. The difference between an interrogation, which I love, and an interview is in an interrogation, the source is not free to go, and they're a lot more fun. Okay, a successful interviewer is a good listener. Remember Chris Matthews had that hardball show? Okay, he was not a good listener. His talk to listen ratio was off the charts. Not a good host, not a good journalist for a number of reasons. If I'm doing an interview, I'm going to control the conversation. I'm not going to let them dictate what's said. I'm not going to let them dictate what blind alley we go down. Um, paralystic, paralinguistic interjections. Avoid them. Those are the ums, the ers, and we'll talk about how you can do this. The pregnant pauses, although pauses sometimes can be a good thing. A good interviewer keeps their word. If you're going to promise somebody something, if they talk to you, deliver. Do what you say. But the most important quality is something that's really hard to define. We all know people that you want to talk to. Okay, become the type of person that somebody wants to talk to. It's natural. It doesn't happen. Okay, this is the most important thing we're going to go over today. I structure an interview. I don't care if I'm going to do a 5 minute on a phone or if I'm going to go and have a sit down with somebody in an interview that could take a couple of days. I break it. I structure my interview into 6 specific phases: planning and prep, approach, questioning, recording and reporting, termination, and detection of deception. Detection of deception is the one phase that runs throughout your interview. Don't kill yourself trying to take notes. I'll make this whole thing available to you. If anybody wants it when we're done, by all means take it. But we're going to talk about each of these in depth, because if you use these 6 techniques, you're going to have tremendous interviews. I don't care if it's for your radio, your podcast, or for your story. Number 1, set the planning and prep. Set the TDP, the time, date, place of the interview. Make sure you both know it. Sounds pretty simple, right? But you'd be surprised how many young reporters went out to meet somebody and they had screwed that up. Young reporters can screw up a lot of things. Special needs, what kind of gear you might need, whether or not you need an interpreter. Okay, set that up. But the number one thing you need to do during your planning and prep, and again, I don't care if it's a 5-minute interview or a 15-day interview, write your questions down. Write your questions down. Write your questions in advance. I cannot stress the importance of that. Doesn't mean you're going to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. You're going to ask follow-up questions. Okay, we're not automatons. We're not robots. But trust me on this. Learn to write your questions in advance, and it'll save you a lot of headache. And I mean a lot of headache. Okay, the approach was really kind of interesting when we were learning how to interrogate enemy prisoners of war. But I digress. An approach is a psychological key that you use to instill in somebody a desire to talk or to become communicative. And 99.9% of the time, it's a direct approach. They know you're coming. They're going to talk to you. You ask them questions. They know what this is all about. But there are, I mean, when Britain rescued all their people and reinvaded the Falkland Islands, I may or may not have talked to some interrogators who were there, some British guys. They used the direct approach 99.9% of the time. It works. They also didn't have to talk to anybody under the rank of major. But if you could tweak an approach, and I'll give you a couple, it really helps open up the person. It helps get them on the phone or make them willing to sit down with you. The number one I use, other than the direct approach, is fairness. I call it my fairness bomb. Look, I'm doing this story on you, and I've got so and so, and they said you did this wrong. I need to talk to you, brother. We just need we need to be fair. I need to be fair. People understand that. They understand that you want to get their side. If they're really guilty, they won't. But if they're at all concerned about self-preservation, obviously they're going to talk. Other little tricks I've used, I'll maybe walk in with a big file full of papers. May or may not be related to the story I'm looking during a showdown interview, but it lets the source know that, oh my God, what does he have? He's got everything ever written about me. It's a technique you can use, and I like to blend them. Any questions on that? I know that's kind of nebulous. We'll come back to it if there's any questions. Questioning. Second most important phase. I use the direct questioning technique. A direct question is designed to elicit a narrative response. If I say, is your name Cheryl? She's going to say yes or no. Okay. We don't want yes or no answers. We want narrative answers so you can write them down and quote them. What is your name? My name is Cheryl. A very simple example, but don't ask yes or no questions. What is the first word we learned as young kids? No, right? That's usually from mom or dad. Don't let your source get into a yes or no. Ask them narrative questions that gives you something you can write down and quote. Is that clear? That's a huge point. Types of questions to avoid. Leading, especially with somebody young. I could lead a young person right up to get them to admit they were on the grassy knoll. Compound questions. An example of that would be, what is your name and where do you live? Okay, ask one question at a time. Again, a direct question. Um, Negative questions. You didn't do that, did you? Well, how do you answer that? Avoid those kind of questions I use. Repeat. Now, I will, when I'm writing my questions out in advance, which again, I stress you have to do, phrase them a little bit differently throughout if you've got a lengthy interview, if you've got a showdown interview. Why I do this is I want to make sure they give me the same answers for every question. I want to make sure that they are not being deceptive. And follow-ups, follow-up. Just because you have your questions written down doesn't mean you're not going to go down several different avenues and follow up your questions. Don't be a robot. Don't just read off the script. I used to try to use at least two methods of recording and reporting. Okay, for me, I take notes faster on my computer than I can write. As a young reporter, we all had the reporter notebook. I had my own type of basically my own written language, my own shorthand. But it's much easier for me now on a computer. It's also a lot easier to record it on Skype or whatever else you're going to use. Does anybody remember who Leonard Peltier was? He was a activist, Lakota from activists. I was in South Dakota. I got a chance to go down and interview him in federal prison. He killed a couple FBI agents, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. But he's always professing his innocence. I went in, I interviewed him, and he admitted to shooting at him with, they were both killed with an AR. He admitted shooting at him with a British 303. And I had a little tape recorder running, and I'm taking hand notes, and I had my tape recorder running, not realizing I was sitting next to a soda machine that had some kind of weird resonance thing that totally screwed up my tape. Couldn't understand a word on it. It was really weird. Had I only relied on that, I would not have had an interview. So always try and do at least two, or you have a Leonard Peltier example of your own. Termination is not what it sounds like. You're basically telling your source you're going to be contacted again. Anything you wish to change, add, or delete, I'm going to check everything for truthfulness. Why do we do this? Well, for young reporters, they're famous about not getting all the questions answered. They bring a story to me. I look at it and go, this thing's full of holes, and it's full of some other stuff too. So you got to recontact the source. So set the source up right away, knowing that they will be contacting it again, whether you're going to do it or not. Hugely important. And because, again, I'm training you how to do a showdown interview, and these people may lie, that's a good bomb to drop on them. I'm going to check everything that you said for truthfulness and accuracy. Keeping that in mind, is there anything you wish to change, add, or delete? And if they go, yeah, you know you got a problem. Okay, this is the fun one. This is the hard one. Not one of these suggestions that I'm going to give you is foolproof. Not one of them works 100% of the time all on its own, but together, these have a pretty good track record of letting you know if somebody's lying to you or not. Again, you're using your repeat and your control questions. Control questions are simply questions I already know the answer to. And I'm gonna ask the source that several different ways. And obviously, if he's not telling you the truth, you'll know that right away. I went to an Israeli course on detection of deception, and they stressed pronoun usage. It was a 3-day course on a written statement analysis. It was a fantastic school. The guy that led it was a former Shin Bet officer, and they focused solely on pronoun usage. And I'm going to give you a very simple explanation. If you're talking to somebody about something really dicey and they're going, I did this, I did this, I did this, and all of a sudden they break into like we, plural, and then they go back to the I did this, I did this, I did this. You might want to focus in on the we stuff where he's sharing his guilt, where he's sharing responsibility. It's deadly if you can do it right. I'd highly recommend the course. Kinesics are body language. And body language is neat. There's a lot of people that will take your money and try and teach you some kinesics courses. The problem is it's not cross-cultural, or it's not even doesn't work in the same regions of the country. And for me, I mean, yeah, if I'm going like this, I might be deceptive. I also might be cold, and I'm freezing my ass off here because I'm used to Florida. Okay. Um, Usually when somebody says, I swear to God, I swear on my kids, that's pretty good for me. That's always been a pretty good indication that you're encountering some deception. And then your old gut feeling. This person's lying to me. I just know it. You add all those up and you got a pretty good indicator that somebody's full of crap. Now, when I was at the Herald Tribune, this woman got out of prison. She served 17 years for manslaughter. And she got this attorney that I know, and she's Professor Innocence. Professor Innocence wanted me to do this huge story on how this innocent woman was was in prison for 17 years for a crime she never committed. And I talked to her, and if I'm going to do that story, I got no problem doing that story. I mean, I'm going to give her everything but a proctological exam, okay? Because that's me putting my word and my paper out there saying that the Justice Department screwed up. This woman never should have gone to prison. I was still 50-50 on her, and I had interviewed her at length. I'd used all these techniques that we're talking about. So I went to my editor and I said, Bill Church, the samurai, and I said, we need to hire a polygraphist. And he looked at me like, are you that crazy? And I said, hey, it's my word, it's your paper, it's your word. So we did, and we brought in a polygraph operator who had been recommended by the sheriff, who was a friend of mine, and he polygraphed her. Now remember, I was 50-50. She flat out cold failed every damn question regarding guilt. So it's a tool. I would use it again. They're not, polygraphs are not 100%. It's not like you see on Dr. Phil. But they combined can be a great and effective way of getting to know whether or not you have somebody who's being deceptive. Counter interviewing. Now, if you run into any of this, you got somebody who's being a real pain. Number one thing about how to thwart an interview is filibustering. Can anybody think of an example? Let's say maybe a public servant, maybe some elected official who, when asked a question, just runs off at the mouth. I like to call it diarrhea of the mouth. They just try and play the clock out, make it very difficult for you to talk to them because they just run their suck. What I will do when I encounter that is I'll stop them. Okay, hey, that's great. I'm glad glad you came from a middle-class family. Glad you had nice yards. But let's get back to the point. Why they don't do that on MSLSD, I have no idea. Now, some of these other folks will ask you, what do you think? Not important. We're not here about my opinion. I'm here to get you quoted for a story. A lot of lawyers like to do that. No offense, Mark. Um, Sometimes they'll demand written questions. Now, I've had some young reporters who are missing about 15 pounds of their butts because they would submit written questions when somebody demanded them. What that does is, if you give somebody questions in advance, other than like an expert interview, with an expert, it's no big deal. But if you've got a bad guy or somebody who may be a bad guy, and they want written questions and you give it to them, keep in mind, they're probably going to be answered by their PR people, by their attorney, and not them. And then the next time another reporter or two-way journalist tries to get them to answer questions, they're going to say, well, I want written questions too. Lee gave me these written questions. And then you just made somebody else's life more difficult. I'll fight it every chance I get. Do not submit written questions. It's a counter-interviewing technique. A lot of these people, especially politicians, will say, well, you're going to have to talk to my spokesperson about that. No, the counter is no. People don't give a damn what your spokesperson says. You're the person in charge. They want to know what you think. That's how you counter that. Written statements. Pretty much the same thing. They'll say, well, we'll kick out a statement. So, well, again, that's written by your spokesperson. People, my readers, my listeners, my viewers want to know what you think, not your people. And then the press conference. I had PA State Police, Pennsylvania State Police, when I was working in Delaware, I had them cold. They were maintaining lists of gun owners. The Pennsylvania State Police were. And I had them, oh man, I had them by the anatomy. And I was getting ready to publish, finally going to get an interview with the colonel of the state police. And next thing I know, an email goes out. They're holding a press conference where they took all my hard work, my work product, and they shared that with all the media in PA. Still pissed about that. But it's a technique. And then what will probably be carved on my tombstone, did not return calls or emails seeking comments. Because most of my stuff with the ATF is incredibly bad about calling back. How to get people to talk to you? Well, there's no magic trick. A source is somebody who provides you information, be that documents or quotes if they're a quotable type person. But before you go looking for somebody you're going to ask questions to, know that they have the knowledgeability. Meaning, if I'm going to ask somebody about a new compensator for an AR or something, I want to make sure they're the right person that knows about this product, that has the knowledgeability to talk about it. And there are different types of sources on the record. You usually read their names in my stories. Background is somebody who will give me some information which I will not quote in the story. They're not an anonymous source, but they're just kind of the person that steers you in the right direction, that doesn't want to be quoted. And then there's an anonymous source, and I probably still have the record at Gannett for having the most anonymous sources in my stories, because an anonymous source is a big deal, and you all need to know this. If you give somebody anonymity for your podcast, for your radio show, for your TV show, for your story, you have just created a legal agreement with them, at least I did, that I will keep your name out of the story. Well, what happens then if you get sued? What happens then if some dirty attorney wants you to produce the name of that source? Well, when I was in South Dakota, that happened. I had an anonymous source in my story, led to a lawsuit. It looked pretty good that your guy here was going to head to the county jail if I didn't, for at least on some contempt charge, if I didn't reveal the name. Well, the sheriff there was a friend, and he later said, the whole thing blew over, thank God I didn't have to go to the jail or be put in the custody of the sheriff. The sheriff said, look, if you were in my custody, we could have drank beers at my house, but I didn't want to be in anybody's custody. So keep in mind that anonymous sourcing, you make an agreement with somebody, that could be a very, very, very serious deal. So watch how you do that. Spokespeople are not sources. People that work for the government, people that work for ATF, people that work for any law enforcement agency that are paid to speak to you, they're not sources. They're paid whores. And that's how I view them. And they want to lie, I'll burn them. So-and-so said this, but according to so-and-so, they're not sources. You don't have to treat them with anything. They deserve contempt and not respect. But the number one way to get good sources is by reputation. For some weird reason, I have the reputation of cutting proverbial throats, and that will help people who have an axe to grind against ATF or another organization. They'll find you and they'll reach out to you. So you develop your own reputation. Your reputation helps you with source development. Who here has filed a FOIA? Anybody? Federal, state, local? State? I know you have. The FOIA master. I'm still waiting on FOIAs from the Air Force and the CAA that I filed probably 15 years ago. FOIAs are depending on where you're at and who. Federal FOIAs are a real pain. We're still waiting on ATF to respond to we being Second Amendment Foundation. Depending on where you live, I mean, Florida has incredible public information laws. Public officials in my free state of Florida can actually be fired or charged criminally if they violate public records law. I don't know what things are out here. but it's a helpful tool. Keep in mind that it's not magic. You file a FOIA. If you've fought one before, it makes it a lot easier to get a response on a second or third one. Press releases are good and bad. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But I want to talk about databases. There are a lot of databases out there, a lot of federal databases maintained. You look through them. Sometimes there's a story there. I did a story in the Virgin Islands, which I was talking to Dean about. 46 tabloid page size on the police department got me more death threats than I ever had in my life. The lead of which was the best lead I've ever written. It said, Virgin Islands police officers are getting away with murder. And then we buttressed that with 46 written pages. At the time, the Virgin Islands Police Department didn't have a list or keep any kind of record about officer-involved shootings. I know that sounds crazy. So I had to assemble my own database based upon the newspaper records and some other sources. So databases can be great, and they'll add a tremendous amount of weight to whatever you're going to be doing, whatever story. The reason I like documents, especially secret ATF documents that I'm not supposed to have that guys give me, I don't have to say this was given to me by so-and-so. All you have to do for most of the time for a document is said, according to documents obtained by the Second Amendment Foundation's Investigative Journalism Project, or something like that. You don't have to say who gave them to you, especially if they're official document. And documents of the official type are libel proof. And let's talk about libel. Anybody know the difference between libel and slander? Other than Dean? Go ahead. Absolutely, absolutely. And you can lose everything. I know several journalists that are no longer in the trade because they libeled people and they were wrong and they should have been booted out. A lot of your libel, and I'm not an attorney, a lot of your libel cases are easier to prove if somebody's not a public figure. If they're a public figure, they're harder to legally libel. If they're not a public figure, they don't have to prove malice. They don't have to prove that you went after them. Again, official documents that we discussed, like government documents, are libel proof mostly. Your opinion, anything that's written as an opinion, is generally libel proof. There's also libel per se out there, which is scary. It's like calling somebody a communist, saying they're bad at their job, or saying they have a social disease, are still examples of libel per se. Watch that. Because when I've seen this several times over the years, when a reporter gets sued, the jury just gives a tremendous amount of money, like millions and millions of dollars, to usually, because they empathize. Well, I wouldn't want that somebody writing that crap about me. Usually it gets knocked down upon appeal. I need some water. Should we take a quick break? Want to do 5 minutes? Is that fine? Let's do 5 minutes before I lose the ability to talk. I hadn't tried Colson, but Okay. I know. Okay, we'll get started. How do you become a good writer? Well, the only way I can tell you, I can guarantee it, is one, write a lot, and two, read a lot. Read good authors. All right. I like Twain. I like reading him, and he has my favorite quote on there. I didn't have time to write you a long letter, or write you a short letter, so I had to write you a long one instead, which brings up brevity. I know some reporters, it would take them 15 minutes to tell you that you are on fire. Okay, they're so wordy. Um, Brevity is next to godliness, in my humble opinion. If I'm writing a long story, okay. By the way, Cheryl had a really good question during the break. I guess a friend of ours, Tom Knighton, has written a story about a FOIA where they came back and said, "We'll be happy to give you the information," but they wanted what, 87 grand? Okay, that's real common on FOIAs. They'll respond with some incredible number. What I like to do is very simple. Okay, fine. But my attorney has advised me to tell you that we would like that expenditure itemized. And then if it's really egregious, I'll do a story on their stupid response to my FOIA. And they hate that, especially ATF. Subheads. This is one of my favorite writing techniques. As an investigative reporter, I tend to write, once every, when I was a newspaper man, probably once every couple months. I write a long story. Nobody wants to read, 400 inches of type. So I would break it up with subheads. It's a really easy writing technique. You have your big headline on top, then you have little headlines throughout the story that describe what is coming next. And each one of those little vignettes, each one of those little legs of type is going to think of it as a little mini play. It's got its own opening of the curtain and its own closing of the curtain. The readers appreciate that when you can break it into manageable chunks. Attribution, meaning it means I'm taking text from another source. And this, like anonymous sourcing, can really get us in trouble. There's a thin line between attribution and plagiarism. Now, if I'm going to write a story and I'm going to take some text out of Dean's story, okay, that he wrote for AMMOland, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in a different style of font. I'm going to put it in quotes, and then I'm going to attribute that according to Dean Weingarten wrote in AMMOland. Now, and what I'll also do, and what we can do now, is I'll put a hyperlink in there that links right to his story. So there is no misunderstanding that this is not my words, that these are Dean's words, and it's in quotes, and it's attributed to him, and it hyperlinks right back to his story. One, he'll appreciate the hyperlink, as will Fred at AMMOland. But two, you want to be very careful when you're taking text from some other source. Um, Now, if I had one complaint about our industry and the gun industry and the Second Amendment, I would say we have an excess of first person, right? I try and write every story I can without using I, all right? Along with opinion, we have a lot of opinions out there, maybe too much. Um, some I know too much. So it's better to write avoid using first person. It's a lot cleaner. The readers, it's a lot easier for them. Now, when I was at Gannett, we had like 5 pages. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Right. Sure. I know. Uh, as a writer, I don't want to draw attention to myself. Okay, I want the readers to have their attention solely focused on what I'm writing about. I don't want to become part of the story. All right. I know that goes against the Instagram and all the Facebook crap. I don't like being part of the story. Trust me. I want the issue to be the story. I want the story to sell itself. And I've seen so many, and people don't give a shit on how this affects me as, the lead. Write it third person. it's better for the readers. It's easier for the readers. And quite frankly, nobody cares what I think. All right. Here's the issue. I'm writing about the issue. I'm not going to become part of it. Does that answer your question? Usually it's called, in my world for the last 20 years, it was an opinion story. Um, and I think we overuse it. Nobody cares how this issue affects me. Nobody cares what I think, usually. Yes, sir. Yeah, and I try to avoid that. I've written a few, but if you have a expert voice, obviously like Dean's, there's nothing wrong with it, or Mossad, or Allen's, or some of those. Um, you bet, absolutely. And if I could go on from that, I would say that's the problem with a lot of these young journalists today is none of them want to be reporters. None of them have a loyalty to the truth. None of them want to tell the truth. They want to be a brand. Okay, they want a billion Instagram followers. They want this rather than being solely dedicated to telling the truth and being a truth teller, which leads into ethics. When I worked for Gannett, we had 5 pages of ethics that they violated all the time. They're still violating it. One of my former colleagues, Anthony Cormier, I worked with him at Herald Tribune in Sarasota. He was a Pulitzer Prize winner. Went on to BuzzFeed. Does everyone remember BuzzFeed? I think they're done now, aren't they? Good riddance. Well, he and another BuzzFeed reporter did this story on how accusing President Trump of ordering Michael Cohen to perjure himself. Okay, they accused President Trump of suborning perjury in their story. It was so odd and so wrong that special counsel Robert Mueller actually came out of his cave and said, no. It was the only statement that member Mueller ever issued, saying, no, that story is wrong. Uh, the reporters, my former colleague, neither he nor the other reporter ever admitted that they were wrong. They never said, yeah, we got it wrong, our sources are wrong. To this day, he maintains that he was right. And that if we're going to do anything, let's not do that. We need to police ourselves. There's several layers of how you can make a correction. If I misspell Cheryl, okay, I'm going to write a correction, or I'm sorry, a clarification. Her name is spelled this way. Corrections are if I got your age wrong, which if I said you're 40 as opposed to 25. I would write a correction saying I got her age wrong. Then there's the most serious, and I've only seen this a couple times where they get the entire story wrong. Rolling Stone did that on some of their investigative reporting, where you come forward and you say, hey, everything we wrote was wrong. We retract the story. What I like to do, being in this digital age, if I get something wrong in a story, at least on my website, yeah, I'll fix it. But then I leave a note on top of the story by where my byline is, saying that this story has been changed to reflect so-and-so's current or actual age or name. I think that's fair, right? That lets your readers know that builds huge credibility among your readers that, yeah, I fixed this digitally, you'd probably never know, but I'm calling out the fact that I screwed up. And we're all human. So let your people know that you do that. There's certainly nothing wrong. And if you take anything away from this, make a distinction between news and opinion. Okay, I write opinion pieces for SAF and I write news stories. There's always a clear distinction. You don't combine news and opinion. Okay, well, this is not MSLSD. We're not sitting there, this is not Fox News where we're going to give our opinions on the news. Clearly define news stories, oops, and opinion stories. Sorry about that. Photos. Oh, that's my beautiful Boston Terrier Willa. She's crazy. You can libel somebody with a photo just like you can with words. Ask the Minneapolis Star Tribune about that. Does anybody know who the Hmong are? Hmong. Hill tribes throughout Southeast Asia. We brought thousands of them over here. A lot of them settled in Minneapolis. There was this unfortunate case where there was a young Hmong woman who had some mental issues, and she threw her small baby off of a bridge. Killed the child, obviously. Minneapolis Star Tribune had a picture of this woman who threw her child off the bridge, although it wasn't the right Hmong woman. Yeah, settled out of court for a lot of money. Be very careful with photographs. They can be libelous, just like your words. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, yeah. That was what's her name's campaign website, Kamala's website, or Kamala's campaign rather, that did that. Yeah, anybody that uses AI generated photos like that should be hung by the neck until dead. Seriously. Same with photos on the web. We have so many people when they start out, they'll copy and paste a photo out of Google. Those things are copywritten, and that can get you in some serious trouble. I know this because I would take, when I had my newspaper blog, I would get access to AP photos, and I would cut and paste them from the AP and put them in my blog. And about once a year, some snarky little prick from the AP would call up and say, why are you using AP photos for this gun website? Who gave you access to AP photos? I said, hey, I'm a newspaper man. I work for a newspaper. We have AP access. The photos are used within the copyright guidelines. And he's like, oh, okay. And they'd go away. So be careful. What I use now are, there's stock photo companies. Shutterstock is one of them. I'm not recommending. I'm just saying that's the only one I'm personally aware of, and they're pretty easy. You can get photos on pretty much any topic. Most of them are photo illustrations. They're not actual photos. Photo illustration is something that was set up and then photographed. It's a staged photo. So the way I attribute that in my story is I say photo illustration from licensed Shutterstock account. That way nobody can accuse you of cutting and pasting. Now, government photos like Kamala's website or Joe's website, anything .gov, they're usually within bounds. You can cut and paste them legally because our taxpayer dollars paid for them. So especially with local stuff too, state and local. Um, but the easiest way, yes, sir. I would be careful. Is it a negative or positive caricature? And who's paying for the caricature? Or is it something you've commissioned? If you commission an artist to do a piece of work, nothing wrong with that, as long as you can get the copyright or they allow you to use the copyright. It's all about the copyright. But a caricature is fine. I've seen it used really well over the years, allowing for the fact that you have the copyright or can access the copyright. Yes, sir. I've never really used them. I don't think they'd have a leg to stand on legally. I don't know. Maybe Mark could mention that. I would really give two shits whether or not the Iranians sued me. You know. But the easiest way to do it is like my beautiful portrait of Willa here. Learn how to take and edit your own photos. There's tons of software out there, and that way you own the copyright. Trust me, my second wife was we met at a newspaper, and she was a photog, so they're very very concerned about their copyright on their photos, um, because that's how they make money. So don't get caught. Bad things can happen. They can end up shutting you down. Yes, sir. Yeah. And I know Google has the money and the political reason to go after somebody. Yeah, I've never used a Google map. I've looked at them, but I've never done one. Um, Everybody wants to know how to get published. I don't know if you're writing a book or whatever. If you're writing a book, don't self-publish. Try not to, because regular publishing houses will look very negatively about that. For me, realize that if you want to get published, you're going to do a lot of free work to start. A lot of clips. You're going to start out with keep track of all your stories, all your photos. Those in the broadcast will have a reel, I'm told. You're going to do a lot of stuff for free before you get out there. Now, personally, I'm on Substack and I love it. Okay, there's a lot of former journalists that have gone to Substack. My site is thegunwriter.substack.com. And Substack makes it very easy for you to get published. And there's also monetization possible too. You can join my Substack for free. You can join and pledge money. There's a lot of authors out there. For me, it's beer money because I'm not that crazy about it. Cheap beer money. But there's a lot of authors making a lot of money off Substack. And there's other platforms out there too, but it creates the website for you. It's very easy to use. It's very good software. You can move pictures in there easy. As far as sponsors, I've been sponsored. Sponsors come and go. Realize that today's sponsor may not be with you tomorrow. That's endemic throughout our industry. I don't like certain having sponsors for guns because then I'm kind of linked into those guns. And remember, I'm a member of the staccato cult and I don't shoot anything else. Speaking of staccatos, there's my C2 and my secondary, which I always carry except here in California. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. You will, if you do your job correctly, you will piss people off. And the one thing I don't write about is my personal security. I highly recommend body armor too, um, especially plates. I know that might scare some people. I tell my readers, that's the next thing that they're going to go after is our body armor. So buy it now. Make sure you get it light and buy it while you can, and buy plenty. Buy enough for your whole family. But yeah, I've had death threats over the years, and including one I was telling Dean about when I wrote that story in the Virgin Islands. I had an on-duty officer come in, point a gun at me. I said something I shouldn't have said. He ended up putting it away. We had the whole thing captured. The newspaper I work for down there, Virgin Islands Daily News, had the whole thing on security camera. They suspended him for a week, but they never took his pay. So he basically got a week's vacation for threatening me, and I'm still pissed off about that. You all know your personal security, and because we're all people of the gun, and that's enough said about that. What Q&A? What questions do you have? Yes, sir. Oh, but he was a public figure, right? Okay. Okay. Interesting. Interesting. I haven't, when I got into newspapers, I mean, the artists, the cartoonists and everybody were just kind of getting out of the business. Newspapers obviously are shrinking in size, and a lot of them have only themselves to blame. My newspaper, my last one when I started in Sarasota, the circulation on Sunday was 160,000 every Sunday. Right now, it's about 16,000. So do the math on that. Now that's really good for us, really bad for them. Yes, Mark. Sure. I did not know that. Nice. Nice. But not ever have to rely on it. Nice. What was it? Media what? Okay. Oh, it's a great, great idea. Yeah. Yeah. Great information. Perfect. Yes, sir. He won't be the last. Um, okay, we're going to shift into our exercise here. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about what the exercise is about, press conferences. Now, this is a personal appeal from me, a plea from me. We don't have the resources like the other team does. So if we get to a situation where there's a press conference and it could affect our God-given right to self-defense, our Second Amendment rights, you can go to those. All right. Anybody that tells you that you can't get in to a press conference because you're not credentialed media, you're not legacy media or corporate media or whatever, is committing a First Amendment violation. You have a right as a citizen to go into every press conference that any public official is going to hold. Private, no. But any public official, be it state, local, or federal, if they're going to have a press conference and it could impact our rights, please go. And hopefully somebody will tell you that you can't, because then that's an even bigger story. Okay. And that would be a fantastic story. I'd love to hear about that. So there's kind of rules for a press conference, informal rules. I never asked a question. Yes, sir. Doesn't matter. You're a private citizen. If there's a government held press conference, oh, I would say unless the case or the judge is closing the courtroom, I'm not an attorney. But if the courtroom's open to the public, you should be able to go. I mean, I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that. Okay. Yeah. I'll get the answer for you. Um, for For me, I never asked a question during a press conference because I didn't want to share my work product or my opinion with people. But we're gonna pretend that doesn't occur. I want you to they're interesting to go to, and please don't ever let anybody boot you out. If they do, my phone number is on there. We'll make that a national story for them because you are our eyes and ears. You are our grassroots troops. So we need you at some of these. We're not in 50 states. I'm in the free state of Florida. but you guys are from all over. So we're going to do an exercise right now. I sent out, or you should have a copy of a press release. I apologize. The name of the victim in there is Mark Smith. I forgot Mark Smith was going to be coming and lecturing us today. So we're going to take a break now for 15 minutes. Go ahead and give that a read. And then we come back in and we'll ask some questions. Now you certainly don't have to, but if you want to turn this exercise and you want to write this story, which for me that'd probably take about 10 minutes, and you email that to me, I will edit that. I will take a look at that and I will give that a professional edit and I will email that back to you. So you can see what my half-ass editing actually looks like. I've always been an easy editor. And two, it'll let you know where you're at writing-wise. In my humble opinion, again, just one editor's opinion. So take a break, give that a read. We'll take 15 minutes and we'll come back and we'll do the exercise. And I will be evaluating the questions that you ask. Okay, let's get started. We had our very nice and polite 28-minute warning. Thank you. Oh, yeah. I'm a huge, love it. Love it. Okay, we had a good question come up during the break. What is going to be the future of journalism? Brought from our brothers from New Jersey. My personal opinion, newspapers are going to decline and decline and decline and decline into nothingness. Local issues are going to be handled by local stuff. I think we're going to be moving towards some type of digital amalgam of photos and videos, but there will always be a place for good print. There will always be an audience there for good writing. Firmly believe that. At least I hope. I don't think it's going to be I don't think we've yet decided what the market will bring or what the market will bear. I know newspapers for years have been in decline because, well, quite frankly, they're all run by English majors. All right, there's not a business head among them, and they were so used to getting their content away for free on the web that now that they started, realizing that, hey, we can make money out of this, nobody wants to pay for it. I mean, this digital subscription at my old newspaper right now costs you about $1 a month. The big problem with that in terms of their viability is when you have a print product, you can charge 10 grand or 15 grand back in the day for a full page ad. One of my good friends is a circulation manager. He said with this slide to online everything, as far as from an advertising perspective, the newspapers are turning dollars into dimes, and they really are. I mean, you can get online ads for next to nothing. Okay, has everybody had a chance to read the press release that libels Mark? All right, let's hear some questions. Now, when I originally pitched this, Cheryl had a good question, which I'm going to repeat now. You go to a press conference, there's no guarantee you're going to be able to even get a question asked. What do you do? Like, I've been to press conferences where there were literally hundreds of reporters. Does everybody remember when Payne Stewart, the golfer, augured into the ground in South Dakota when his little private jet that he was in depressurized and they went straight down? I was the first reporter on the scene at that, and there was nothing above ground. It was just a big hole. The plane just went straight in. Later drew everybody. I mean, USA Today sent their plane out and their reporters. So I couldn't even get near it. That was the one time I actually got knocked on my butt by the governor of South Dakota. He was helping pull some cables through. Really weird situation. I couldn't even get a question yelled at the people that were there because there were so many reporters there. So what you do if you can't yourself ask a question is everybody's questions that are asked are kind of feeding you, and you can say things like so-and-so said at a press conference. You don't have to attribute the reporter who asked the question. So it's good to keep in mind. You can go to these press conferences, you can not ask a question, although I kind of recommend it, and you can still end up doing a story. And again, we really need people doing this. We really need people because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And if these people, especially in New Jersey, are going to try and pull these shenanigans, they're going to try and keep it out of the spotlight. Okay, we're at the press conference. Oh God, it kills a little bit of my soul to say this. I'm the ATF spokesman. Okay, what question? Yes, sir. One at a time. I don't know, but all firearms should be sold only through an FFL. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry, you had a follow-up. No comment. Yes, ma'am. Around 6 a.m. and yes, we like to surprise these people. That way it's safer for our agents. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. That's part of our SOP. Yes, ma'am. No, ATF wears no body cams. Keep going. Yeah, no kidding. I don't know. You'd have to ask him. Oh, by the way, the update is he's dead. I'm not being facetious. That's obviously most of you have read about what this is kind of based on, the story. Brian Malinowski, which yes, ma'am. Yes, Mrs. Smith. She was in her bedroom. Um, Distraught. No, no, she's not been detained nor arrested. No, she was unharmed. Yes, sir. I'm not sure. Our investigation will determine that. Other than there was a ring camera out front. Yes. Yes, ma'am. All the firearms were removed from the home. I don't have a complete list. ATF has procedural manners, however, you can't manuals, however, you can't have them. They're classified. Okay, that should be enough for you. Yes, go ahead. We have a SWAT team. We like to keep them sharp. Yes, sir. He's not doing good. That last one you don't need. Yes, sir. Anything having to do with the probable cause to get a search warrant for his home. I've written, and I'm not being the ATF guy now. When I was a policeman, I wrote affidavits for search warrants, and I actually wrote affidavits to go up on a Title III. Mark, you want to tell them what a Title III is? Where you actually listen in on phone calls. The Title III application was the longest document I've ever written. Yes, sir. Yeah, it was. We used a dynamic entry technique. No, he never got outside of his house. Never got outside of his house. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yes. Well, shot and wounded at the time. He died later. Okay, that's enough. One more, and then you have enough to write. Uh, I'm not sure that our investigation will reveal that. I think that might involve sources and methods, which we don't want to get into. Okay, now if you want to write this and if you want to get this to me for editing, I have the easiest email in the world to remember. It's lee@saf.org, lee@saf.org. Go ahead and send it. I'll try and get them edited and back to you this weekend. I think as far as editing goes, when I was a reporter, I hated editing. I hated editors. But when I became an editor, I realized, and now it's everybody's writing needs editing. Me, I send my stuff to Dave Workman, and Dave's edited a story or a million. It's a privilege nowadays. Back in the day when newspapers were fat with people, you know, you had different layers of editing, all the way going up to the executive editor who would read the real important stories. Nowadays, and this is our following, it's a privilege to get somebody to edit your story or take a look at it. I know you go through the same thing. Nobody's perfect. I sometimes I go crazy on commas. I have to have somebody come in and whack about half my commas. Writing is a skill. It's an art. It'll take time. If you can get an opportunity, I'm not saying this to justify this exercise, but if you can get somebody to take a look at your writing before you publish it, even if it's another colleague, by all means do it, because it only makes it better, and they'll see things that you don't see. You always have to have at least 2 or 3 sets of eyes on stories. One of my best friends, Danny, he's still in Florida. He was the best copy editor I've ever known. Went to school for it, graduated with a degree in English, and I would get a project ready, like a 1,000-inch story ready to go. It would go through all, at that time, 7 layers of editing. It would be perfect. Danny would get it. He'd find 15, 20 errors in it. He's a planner right now. He plans at another newspaper where he doesn't even work at. That's how crazy Gannett has gotten, and the newspaper industry has changed. That's why people get angry when they read a story in the newspaper and it's chock full of errors and misspellings and grammar issues. It's difficult. If you really want to get into your writing, I would recommend buying an AP style book, which is a pretty. We don't need to be AP style. We're not print journalists, but I like it. They have some good rules, and it's easy to. It's a good reference book too to look up. Anyway, I have had an absolute ball. You guys have been an incredible group, and I thank God that you're here. I really do, because we need more of you. We need 10 times this number out there, because like I said, you know who the other team has. My phone number, if you send me an email and you want a copy of this, just send it, and I will send you my presentation today. Any final questions? Yes, sir. I don't even know what it is, brother. Yeah, yeah. I'm not really an editor. I just played one for a couple of years. There's 2 kinds of people in newspapering. There's reporters and then there's writers. Okay. I was always a reporter. I was never a writer. My writing always needed a lot of work. Always, I managed to fake it for a couple of decades. Thanks, everybody.